Hello, everybody. This is Summer Meditation. It's July 18th, and hope all of you that are going to be tuning in tonight can find the appropriate stream to go to as we transitioned here, just in case there was some severe weather in the area. Anyway, as you know, we have been looking at Jewish ethics. We've been studying a little bit of Mesilat Yesharim. The last few sessions, we've been looking at Rabbi Elihu Dessler, as a late 19th century, early 20th century rabbi and teacher who interpreted Mesilat Yesharim, the right path, sort of the path of the just. And the actual book itself was written by Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, the original text, Mesilat Yesharim, the path of the upright, so to speak. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the foundational ideas in that book. And literally, when you open it up in the first chapter, what do we find there? What is the sort of opening idea teaching in Mesilat Yesharim? So Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, who wrote this really profound text, asked the question, what is the purpose of this life? What is the purpose of a human's, of the Jews' life here on earth? And this is something that, we study with, sort of struggle with existentially all the time. And what's sort of interesting is that he answers it without a whole lot of difficulty or, self-twisting, what do you call, sort of like twisting himself in knots. He says simply that the purpose of our time here on earth is to delight in God and derive pleasure in God's radiance. That's it. And of course, the question that follows that question is, how do we do that? But whether or not you sort of agree with the premise, it's a simple and compelling one to either wholeheartedly sort of dive into or to sort of struggle with, which is, are we literally only here to serve in God's light, right? To commune with God? Is that really, that's the only thing that we're here to do? And we can, we could sort of talk in person about what that means and what are some of the sort of further arguments or questions that would come out of that. But the questions he sort of asks himself is, how do we do this? How do we serve and delight in God's presence? And one of the reasons that they talk so thoroughly and so often about this idea is that the world to come is mentioned as sort of like the ultimate prize, right, of doing mitzvot in this world. The reward is in the world to come. We talked about that. The reward is in the world to come. So we do mitzvot in this life. Why? To sit and dwell with God. And so I wanted to share this very well-known text that comes actually from Psalm 27, which is a psalm that we often read starting in Elul, the month before the high holidays. And this well-known text that comes from Psalm 27 that David, King David, is attributed to having said these words. Achat sha'alti me'et Adonai ota avakesh. One thing I ask from God, this thing I request. Shivti b'veit Adonai kol yemei chayai. That I can dwell on the house of the Lord forever. Lachazot b'noam Adonai ulevaker b'heichalo. And to gaze upon God's beauty and to visit, ulevaker b'heichalo, to visit God's courts, God's sanctuary. This is all I ask. And sort of dwelling in God's sanctuary, dwelling in the temple, you can imagine the temple courtyards. So again, the words are Achat sha'alti me'et Adonai ota avakesh. So we'll sort of use this as a meditation, and we'll go into a meditation, a silent and guided meditation, on what the Hasidim call dveikut, which is clinging. And Rabbi Luzzatto brings this up, this idea of clinging to God, that our purpose here is to delight in God and derive pleasure in God's radiance. And how do we do that? We cling. We practice dveikut. We practice clinging. So here is the chant, Achat Sha'alti. Achat Sha'alti met Adonai ota avakesh. Achat sha'alti met Adonai ota avakesh. Shivti bevet Adonai kol yemei chayai lachazot benoam Adonai ulevakel beichalo lachazot benoam Adonai ulevakel beichalo. So we'll do it again after we do the meditation, but the meditation here is to sit with this idea of dveikut, to sit with this idea of that we delight in God's pleasure, that we delight in God's radiance, that we sit with, that we long to dwell with God. So we'll start our meditation there with that intention. Take a few deep breaths in. We'll do a little bit of a visualization here of walking up to the Temple Mount. In the days of David, or probably more appropriately King Solomon, of visiting the temple, of literally dwelling in God's house. Think about those words, Lachazot ben Noam Adonai. To gaze upon the pleasantness of God and God's own house, sanctuary. To imagine the awe-inspiring grandeur of it. Now let's just sit in that courtyard for a little bit. If your mind wanders, just come back to the sanctuary, to the Temple Mount. Maybe you're gazing inward at the sanctuary itself, towards the direction of the Kodesh HaKodashim, the Holy of Holies, or maybe you're looking out over Yerushalayim or Yer David, the city of David. Either way, it's a place where the ground itself pulls you, where the air itself is different. Our history and spirituality are intertwined. Hachachati met Adonai ota avakesh. Shivti bevet Adonai koyemei koyai lakazod benom Adonai ulevaker behekalo lakazod benom Adonai ulevaker behekalo. So whenever I sit in the chapel and sing that along with the other daveners in the morning in the month of Elul, I always feel an urgency, a sense of spiritual urgency that we're going to connect with God, that we're starting to connect in a more deep way. And I think part of the teaching that we're studying here is about that. It's about reaching for that connectivity on a daily basis rather than sort of waiting for the big moments of the year to come and tug us along. So this idea of attaining a state of shlemut, of wholeness, you can hear that word shalom in the word shlemut. Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, sometimes referred to as Ramchal, he says that a man is placed on a battlefield where many factors attempt to draw us away from holy behavior. That there are so many things in the earthly realm that prevent us from communing with the divine, that distract us. And he refers primarily to this temptation of lust, which may be physical, but it's probably also meant to be material or manifest as jealousy, let's say, as well. That lust is a large category. Things that we lust after obviously could be money, clothing, fame, obviously another's maybe another's position, another's job, another's spouse, anything like that. Some of these things are enumerated very specifically in the Ten Commandments. Some of them are enumerated very specifically in the Torah itself. Others are a little bit more obscure or a little bit more subtle. But we know what they are. We know what it is to be human. We know what it is to have lust for things. In fact, in the second paragraph of the Shema, it talks about you should not lust after what your eyes see. Sort of, don't be drawn in, or don't be fooled by sort of the excitement that your eyes take in. So what is the cure for this, or what is the sort of defense against this? And what he posits is to hoe closer to mitzvot, and to sort of lust after mitzvot, right, instead of earthly things, so to speak. So we've done this many times on this prayer Yedid Nefesh. It's on page 10 of Lev Shalem if you want to follow along. But it's a perfect encapsulation of this idea that we try to put ourselves in scenarios where we're actually lusting after a relationship with God rather than earthly things that we talked about. And it sort of amazingly has been codified and printed in the city of Sfat, where it was written on a large wall when you walk into the sort of old religious quarter of Sfat, where many of the oldest synagogues are, overlooking the outlook, where they wrote the first Psalms for Kabbalat Shabbat, or wrote the first, I should say, Lecha Dodi, not the Psalms, but the Piyutim, the poems. Yedid Nefesh is right there, right? It's codified right there, and you can see it, all 4 paragraphs there. And so I wanted to sing this as a chant just to invoke this idea that we have a practice of sort of putting ourselves lusting after God rather than lusting after earthly things. And this is also sort of spoken about and evoked in Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs. So Yedid Nefesh is a prayer, is a text that means friend of my soul. Yedid Nefesh Avarachaman Meshochadach Eretzonach Yarutz Adach Kemo Ayal Kemo Ayal Yishtachave Emul Hadarach Emul Hadarach Yeravlo Yedidutach Minofet Suf Minofet Suf Bechol Ta'am V'chol ta'am Ay, 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 So again, this idea of Yedid Nefesh, friend of my soul, we have this amazing sort of island in time on Shabbat to feel this way, to sing with other people, to sort of indulge ourselves in this sort of spiritual moment. High holidays are the same thing. So again, going back to the first idea, tying in with the second idea, it's creating sort of more of these islands that are a daily practice and not just a weekly practice or a monthly practice or maybe even a yearly practice of how do we get more of this sort of dveikut, how do we get more of this clinging, how do we get more of this idea of putting ourselves in God's orbit all of the time. So we'll meditate here with the intention or the idea of desiring to do mitzvot, right? It feels really good when we're doing Yedid Nefesh or we're singing a song that's familiar to us, that's comforting to us, and we feel like, yes, I could do more, I could be more, I could take something on. In this moment, I feel energized and I feel inspired to do something. And so sitting here in this moment, we could just think of one thing for yourself that you can do, that you could take on, whether it's a weekly thing or a monthly thing, whether it's a kashrut or it's Shabbat or it's taking time for prayer or it's, attending some kind of minyan or it's community service, whatever it is that you feel like something more to keep yourself, as we said before, to keep yourself connected to the mitzvot, right? The mitzvot are the way that we keep ourselves in that relationship with God and keep ourselves focused on what's important and less focused on the earthly desires that the rabbi talks about, these these forces on the battlefield. So again, we'll come back into some relaxed meditation here. Sometimes I just like to take a big deep breath and release some stress. So maybe your mitzvah is as simple as saying a bracha before you eat a piece of food, which I would say is an act of mindfulness. Maybe it's making a menu for somebody, morning or evening. Parachamam. Mishoch Avdach. Mishoch Avdach. Erotzonach. Eretzonach. Yerotz Avdach. Yarutz Avdach. Kemo Hayam. Kemo Hayam. Ishtachave. Ishtachave. Mul Hadarach. El Mul Hadarach. Ki Ravlo. Ki Ravlo. Yedidutach. Yedidutach. Minofet Suf. Minofet Suf. Vechol Tam. Well, I want to thank all of you for being at this session tonight on stream. And we'll be back for the middle two dates in August. I believe it's the 12th and the 19th. You can check the calendar, but it's evenings, and we'll continue to have a conversation about potential morning meditations in September. Elul will have some meditations in the park. More information on that soon. That'll be in September. So we'll end as we always end, bringing hands to heart center and chanting the Shema. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Thank you all so much. See you next month.